I used to think the worst part of working on a joint human, alien research station was the recycled air that always smelled faintly like metal and citrus. Turns out I was wrong. The worst part is realizing that when an alien stares at you too intently and takes notes every time you laugh, there's a non-zero chance she's not being creepy, she's being academic. That was my life for the past 6 weeks. She was a junior xenobiologist, freshly assigned, still bright-eyed in that way people get when they haven't yet been crushed by paperwork, politics, or the reality that most groundbreaking research involves watching other people drink beverages and asking them how it makes them feel. Her specialty was human bonding behavior, which meant that, unfortunately for me, I was considered a prime observational subject. Apparently, I had average looks, average stress levels, and an emotional range that was statistically representative. I've never felt more insulted and flattered at the same time. Every day, she sat across from me in the lab, posture perfect, eyes locked, pupils doing strange, subtle things that I was told not to comment on. She asked questions in a soft, careful voice, like each word had been unwrapped from a protective layer of caution. Why do humans smile when nervous? Why do humans touch each other's arms when speaking? Why do humans form pair bonds and then dissolve them, only to attempt again? That one earned her a long sigh and a joke about poor life choices, which she recorded with alarming seriousness. She didn't laugh much. Not at first. When she did, it startled her so badly she nearly dropped her data slate. Her species, I'd learned, didn't vocalize amusement naturally. Laughter was considered a physiological anomaly tied to emotional overflow. Humans did it constantly. We laughed when we were happy, sad, stressed, terrified, and sometimes just because silence felt too loud. To her, it was fascinating. To me, it was starting to feel like being studied by a very polite, very curious predator. Except predators didn't blush. The first time it happened, I thought something in the lab had overheated. A faint shift in her skin tone, just along her cheek ridges, like a sunrise trying not to be noticed. She froze mid-question, eyes flicking away from mine, fingers tightening around the slate. Are you unwell? I asked, genuinely concerned. She shook her head too quickly. No. This is a reaction. It is considered inappropriate. That only made it worse. Over time, I pieced together fragments of her culture through careful explanations and accidental slips. Her species did not date. They did not experiment. They did not see how things go. They mated once, permanently, in a ritual so sacred it was rarely spoken of outside their homeworld. Mating wasn't romance. It wasn't passion. It was identity. It rewrote who you were, legally, socially, biologically. To choose a mate was to choose your entire future in a single, irreversible decision. Which made her interest in human bonding behavior either incredibly brave or wildly irresponsible. Probably both. She asked about love like it was a dangerous chemical compound. She wanted definitions, categories, probabilities. She wanted to know how humans could feel so deeply and still walk away. I tried to explain heartbreak, growth, mistakes, the strange hope that survived even after things went wrong. She listened like someone hearing about fire for the first time, terrified and drawn in equal measure. Sometimes she leaned forward without realizing it. Sometimes she mirrored my posture. Once, when I yawned, she did too, then immediately apologized and wrote herself a note about involuntary mimicry. The station staff teased me about it. Quietly. Respectfully. Mostly. Apparently, when an alien scientist watches you like you're the most interesting variable in the universe, people notice. I brushed it off. I joked. I told myself it was just research. Then came the day she stopped recording. It was subtle at first. A pause before activating the slate. A question asked without documentation. A silence that lingered just a second longer than necessary. The blush returned more frequently, deeper now, spreading faster. She struggled to meet my eyes, which was new. Usually, she met them head-on, unflinching, curious. That day, her hands shook. I have reached a logical inconsistency, she said. Oh? I smiled. Welcome to being human. She didn't smile back. According to my data, human bonding cannot be fully understood through observation alone. That tracks, I said. We're confusing even when you're inside our heads. She swallowed. Actually swallowed. Her species didn't need to for moisture. It was a stress response she'd picked up unconsciously. To resolve this, she continued, voice barely above a whisper, I must ask a direct question. I leaned back, relaxed, expecting something awkward but harmless. Questions were her comfort zone. Data was safe. Curiosity was controlled. She looked at me then. Really looked. Not like a scientist. Like someone standing on the edge of something irreversible. Would you? She began, then stopped, color flaring across her face so vividly it felt intimate just to witness it. Would you do what mates do? For half a second, my brain stalled. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, well, maybe a little, but because humans laugh when reality throws them a curveball and they don't know where else to put the reaction. I waved a hand, still chuckling. That's a translation glitch, right? You mean like teamwork? Cooperation? Humans use mate for a lot of things. She didn't laugh. She didn't even breathe. Her eyes were wide, terrified, hopeful, and mortified all at once. The slate slipped from her fingers and clattered softly onto the table, forgotten. She clasped her hands together like she was holding herself in place. I am aware of the linguistic flexibility, she said quietly. This is not a mistake. The laughter died in my throat. Around us, the lab hummed. Machines clicked. Somewhere down the corridor, voices faded as the last of the staff signed off for the cycle. The lights dimmed slightly, shifting into after-hours mode. And for the first time since I'd met her, I realized this wasn't an experiment. This was a question she was never supposed to ask. And I had no idea how to answer it. I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline that didn't come. Usually, when someone said something wildly inappropriate on the station, there was a grin afterward, or at least a hint of irony. She just stood there, hands still clasped, skin still doing that impossible color shift that made my brain short-circuit. So, I said carefully, buying time the way humans always do. When you say mates, you're not talking about, like, colleagues who share a workspace and complain about management? Her shoulders twitched. No. Friends who trust each other enough to borrow tools and not return them? No. Two people who agree to tolerate each other's bad habits in exchange for occasional emotional support and shared meals? She hesitated. That sounds adjacent. But insufficient. I rubbed the back of my neck. Okay. Just checking. Because on Earth, that word gets used for a lot of things. Sometimes it just means buddy. Sometimes it means partner. Sometimes it means the idiot I grew up with who still owes me money. She blinked. Humans bond, financially? Only when we make poor decisions. That earned me a tiny, startled sound that might have been a laugh. She immediately covered her mouth, eyes wide, as if she'd committed some unspeakable breach of protocol. The blush intensified. I apologize, she said. That was inappropriate. Trust me, I said gently. You're still well within human tolerance levels. She took a slow breath, visibly steadying herself. On my world, the concept you are describing does not exist. There is no casual application of the term. A mate is a singular designation. Once chosen, it is permanent. It is recorded. It is biologically reinforced. I raised an eyebrow. Biologically? She nodded, then seemed to realize what she'd implied and flushed even deeper. Not in a manner you are imagining. It is complicated. Of course it is, I muttered. Everything alien always is. She tilted her head. Is that resentment? No, I said quickly. That's admiration mixed with confusion. We do that a lot too. She seemed to relax at that, just a fraction. Then I will attempt to clarify my inquiry with greater precision. I braced myself. To do what mates do, she said slowly, like she was stepping through a minefield, is to engage in sustained emotional prioritization, mutual vulnerability, shared private time, and the exploration of compatibility beyond observable behavior. I stared at her. You just described dating, I said. Her eyes widened. That is a separate practice? Very separate, I said. It's the thing we do before we even consider the other thing. Sometimes long before. Sometimes forever before. She frowned, tapping her fingers together in a way I'd learned meant she was mentally reorganizing her entire worldview. But how do you determine permanence without first committing to it? We don't, I said. That's kind of the point. She looked genuinely distressed by that. That seems inefficient. Oh, absolutely, I agreed. We're terrible at efficiency. But we're great at learning what doesn't work. Her gaze dropped to the table between us. On my world, learning what does not work has consequences. The way she said it, quiet, careful, told me more than any cultural briefing ever could. This wasn't just academic curiosity. This was risk. Real, personal risk. I tried to lighten the mood. For what it's worth, most humans don't jump straight to lifelong commitment either. If someone asked me that question back home, I'd probably assume they were joking too. Her eyes flicked up sharply. Then your initial reaction was appropriate? Yeah, I said. From a human perspective. She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. That is, relieving. I was concerned I had offended you beyond recovery. No offense, I said. Just mild existential panic. That, finally, made her laugh properly. It was soft and uncertain, like she was testing a sound she wasn't sure she was allowed to make. It was also incredibly endearing, which was not helping my ability to think rationally. She composed herself quickly, straightening her posture. Then I must ask a follow-up question. Of course you do, I said. It'd be weird if you didn't. If humans engage in this, dating, without permanence, how do you prevent emotional harm? I snorted. We don't. Her eyes widened again. You do it knowingly? All the time. That is horrifying. Welcome to Earth. She studied me for a long moment, not as a subject this time, but as a person. And yet, she said slowly, you continue to seek bonds despite this certainty of pain. Yeah, I said. Because sometimes it works. And even when it doesn't, we usually decide it was worth it. She looked down at her hands. On my world, worth is calculated before action. On ours, I said, we usually calculate it afterward. Silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. The lab felt smaller somehow, quieter. I realized then that she hadn't reached for her data slate once since dropping it. No notes. No recordings. Just presence. I did not intend for this inquiry to progress beyond theory, she admitted. But the more I observed you, the more incomplete my understanding became. That happens, I said. Humans are bad for clean data. Her lips curved faintly. You are. She hesitated again, that same visible internal battle playing out across her features. If I retract the question, she said, it will not resolve the inconsistency. And if you don't, it may alter my future irreversibly. I swallowed. Suddenly, this felt far above my pay grade. Well, I said carefully, for what it's worth, humans usually start with something small. Conversation. Shared time. No promises. Just curiosity. She considered that. You are suggesting a controlled exposure. Exactly, I said. Low risk. High data yield. Her eyes lit up at that, scientist instincts briefly overriding everything else. That could be acceptable. Then the lights dimmed another degree, signaling the station's transition into full after-hours mode. The distant hum of activity faded until it was just us and the quiet machinery. She looked around, then back at me, color blooming across her cheeks once more. The lab is now unoccupied, she said softly. This is no longer an observation period. My stomach flipped. No, I agreed. It's not. She met my gaze, equal parts terrified and resolute. Then my question, she said barely above a whisper, still stands. But perhaps, redefined. And somehow, that was more dangerous than the first time she'd asked it. The silence after that felt heavier than anything she'd said so far. Not awkward silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you aware of your own breathing. The lab hummed softly, machines cycling through routines that suddenly felt intrusive, like they were eavesdropping. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, a movement so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching her too closely. Her hands unclasped, then clasped again, fingers lacing together in a way that looked less like discipline and more like self-restraint. This is the point, she said quietly, where humans typically make a decision, yes? I let out a slow breath. Sometimes. Or we pretend we're not making one. She tilted her head. Is that preferable? Only if you enjoy lying to yourself? That earned a soft exhale from her, not quite a laugh, but close. She glanced toward the lab door, then back at me, as if expecting it to open and reveal an audience that would make this whole thing easier by turning it back into a performance. It is considered improper, she said, to engage in personal bonding within a professional environment. I nodded. Trust me, HR back home would have a field day. Her eyes flickered with curiosity. Human resources? A department devoted to explaining why emotions are inconvenient. She seemed to think about that. Your species expends considerable effort controlling outcomes it does not fully understand. Guilty, I said. So do you, apparently. She stiffened, then relaxed. Yes. I do. For a moment neither of us spoke. The words she hadn't said hung between us, fragile and dangerous. I realized then that she wasn't waiting for a clever answer or a reassuring joke. She was waiting for honesty. I need to be clear, I said slowly. Because this is where humans tend to mess things up. Her posture straightened. Clarity is appreciated. When you asked that question, I continued, I laughed because I thought you were playing with language. I didn't realize you were risking something real. She nodded. Your reaction was statistically predictable. My decision was not. That hit harder than I expected. On my world, she went on, to initiate mating discourse without formal authorization is considered reckless. To do so with a non-citizen species is unprecedented. And yet, I said, here you are. Yes, she said softly. Here I am. Her eyes met mine again, and this time there was no analytical distance. No subject-object divide. Just a person standing at the edge of something she didn't fully understand, asking another equally confused person to meet her there. I do not require permanence from you, she said. I am aware that your species does not operate that way. But I need sincerity. I swallowed. That's not nothing. I know. I leaned back against the edge of the table, grounding myself. Here's the thing. Humans are good at enthusiasm. We're terrible at foresight. If we jump into something without understanding the stakes on both sides, someone gets hurt. Her gaze softened. You are concerned about harming me. Yeah, I said. I am. That seemed to surprise her more than anything else I'd said. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in thought. On my world, she said, harm is assumed to be the cost of ignorance. On ours, I replied, we like to pretend we can avoid it by talking first. She considered that. Then, talk to me. So I did. I told her about dating. Not the romanticized version, but the awkward truth of it. About how humans try to present the best version of themselves and usually fail. About how attraction is messy and timing is cruel, and sometimes the person who feels right doesn't fit into your life at all. I told her about first dates that went nowhere and connections that burned bright and fast and left scars when they ended. She listened without interrupting, eyes steady, expression open. No notes. No slate. Just attention. And you still choose to engage, she said when I finished. Most of us do, I said. Because when it works, even a little, it's kind of amazing. Her fingers tightened together. On my world, bonding is not amazing. It is stabilizing. Predictable. Safe. And boring? I asked before I could stop myself. Her lips twitched. I did not say that. But you didn't deny it. She looked away, the blush returning. There are individuals who have questioned the tradition. Quietly. And you're one of them, I said. Yes. The word carried weight. Defiance. Fear. Curiosity. I don't want to be your rebellion, I said gently. Or your experiment. She turned back to me, eyes bright. Then do not be there. Then what am I? She hesitated, searching for the right translation. You are the variable I cannot remove. I laughed despite myself. That's the most flattering thing anyone's ever said to me. She smiled fully then, a genuine one, unrestrained. It was not intended as flattery. Still counts. Another stretch of quiet passed, but it was different now. Warmer. The kind of silence that invites closeness without demanding it. I do not know what will happen, she admitted. If I proceed, I may be reassigned. Or worse. And if you don't? I will always wonder. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about mating or science, or even culture. It was about choice. About standing at a crossroads and deciding whether curiosity was worth the risk. Humans have a saying, I said. We regret the things we don't do more than the ones we do. She nodded slowly. That aligns with my preliminary data. I smiled. See? You're learning already. She stepped closer, not touching, just closing the space between us enough that I could feel the warmth she radiated. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet and deliberate. Then, she said, voice steady despite the color flooding her cheeks, I propose we redefine the parameters. How so? I asked. We begin with what you described earlier, she said. Conversation. Shared time. No permanence. No obligation. And no data collection, I added. She hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. The machines hummed. The lab lights held steady. Nothing else in the universe shifted. But something between us had. And for the first time, I wasn't laughing to deflect the weight of it. We didn't seal anything with a dramatic gesture. No ceremonial words. No sudden rush of emotion that demanded an audience. If anything, the moment felt deliberately ordinary, which I was starting to suspect was exactly why it mattered. So, I said, clearing my throat, according to human tradition, the next step is usually something incredibly mundane. Her eyes flicked up, curious. Mundane? Yeah. We talk. We sit somewhere that isn't a lab. We maybe consume food that isn't nutritionally optimized. She considered that with grave seriousness. Food-based bonding has been noted as significant in your species. See? I said. You're already ahead of the curve. She allowed herself a small smile. What would this conversation entail? Anything, I said. Backgrounds. Interests. The embarrassing things that make us who we are. Her blush flared again. Embarrassment is not considered a bonding requirement on my world. It absolutely is on ours. That earned another soft laugh, this one steadier than before. She seemed less afraid of the sound now, like she'd decided it wasn't dangerous after all. We moved away from the center of the lab, settling at a small table near the observation window. The stars beyond the station's hull drifted slowly, indifferent witnesses to a moment that felt far bigger than it had any right to be. I was not supposed to form attachments here, she said quietly. Most good human stories start that way, I replied. She tilted her head. Stories? Yeah. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of choices that don't fit the plan. She absorbed that. On my world, plans are not optional. And yet, I said, gesturing vaguely between us, here we are again. She folded her hands on the table, posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. When I first observed humans, she admitted, I believed your bonding behaviors were inefficient because they lack structure. Now I believe they persist because of that. Chaos has its perks, I said. Yes, she agreed. It allows for discovery. We talked about Earth, about her homeworld, which she described with a fondness she hadn't allowed herself in earlier conversations. About expectations placed on her as a junior scientist, as someone who was supposed to follow protocol rather than question it. About me, and how I'd ended up on a station light years from home with a job that mostly involved explaining why humans make jokes when they're uncomfortable. At some point, she asked, Do you fear impermanence? I thought about it. I fear pretending permanence is guaranteed. She nodded slowly. That may be the fundamental difference between our species. And maybe, I said, the thing that makes us compatible. She paused at that, eyes searching mine. The word lingered between us, unrecorded and unexamined. On my world, she said, compatibility is assessed before emotional investment. On ours, I replied, emotional investment is how we figure out compatibility. Her smile this time was unmistakable. Warm. Real. Unburdened by fear. I believe, she said, that your approach is terrifying. High praise, I said. She reached for her data slate then, and for a split second my heart sank, until I realized she wasn't activating it. She powered it down and slid it into her bag. This interaction, she said, will not be documented. Rebellious, I said. I like it. She blushed, but didn't look away. It is not rebellion, she corrected. It is prioritization. The station lights shifted again, simulating the passage of time in a place where time had no natural meaning. Somewhere down the corridor, life continued. Schedules were kept. Rules were followed. The universe remained largely unchanged. Except for her. Except for me. I do not know what this will become, she said. Only that it is mine to choose. That's all humans ever ask for, I said softly. The choice. She stood, hesitating only a moment before extending her hand toward me. Not a ritual gesture. Not a cultural formality. Just an offer. I took it. Her grip was warm, steady, real. She looked down at our joined hands like it was something both ordinary and miraculous. This, she said, would not be considered mating. Good, I said. It'd be a terrible first step. She laughed, genuinely this time, the sound bright and unrestrained. The blush returned, but she didn't try to hide it. As we walked toward the exit together, she glanced up at me. Humans redefine many things through experience, do they not? All the time, I said. I believe, she said thoughtfully, that my people may need to redefine the concept of a mate. I smiled. Careful. That's how cultural revolutions start. She squeezed my hand just a little tighter. Then perhaps, she said, they should start with a conversation. The door slid open. The corridor lights welcomed us back into the station's quiet rhythm. No experiments. No cameras. No data. Just two beings choosing curiosity over certainty. And somehow, that felt like the most human thing in the universe.